Hey folks, this is Major Jones here to talk to you about the memory hierarchy. So we are going to describe why memory is a little more complicated than we initially thought, and how we can structure the memory so as to keep the best performance for our processor. So that involves describing sort of an inverse relationship between size and speed for the technology that makes up our computer memory. And in order to get our best performance, we're going to take advantage of two things called temporal and spatial locality to keep our performance. And lastly, we'll show you how registers, level 1, level 2 caches, main memory, and storage form this memory hierarchy. All right, so let's get started. To begin with, it's important to take a look at this little table here, which is showing you a couple of different ways that we can build computer memory out of either flip-flops, SRAM, or DRAM, and how each one of those, how much space each one of those takes, and what the typical latency is. So you can see here that if we want memory that takes just a fraction of a cycle to access, we build it out of D flip-flops. But the problem is D flip-flops are over 100 times bigger than a typical DRAM cell, which itself takes 50 to 200 clock cycles to access. And what we want is we want lots of computer memory. We want gigabytes of computer memory. The problem is if we try to build that all out of D flip-flops, well, that would be gargantuan. Even for as small as we can put stuff onto a microchip. If we built our memory out of D flip-flops, it would be gargantuan. And in reality, there's a limit to how much we can sort of stuff into a silicon wafer. And so in reality, if we try to build something out of D flip-flops, we actually have very small memory. And if we try to stuff as much in there as we can, we try to build our memory out of DRAM cells, well, now we got this weird latency problem where we might have 200 clock cycles that were spent waiting for our memory accesses. And, of course, that's a big problem because, at least once every instruction, we are fetching something out of memory, potentially multiple times, right? In the processing of these instructions, we are accessing memory. And if each one of these accesses takes 200 clock cycles, holy cow, our performance is just going to go, it's going to tank, right? We have these values here that we sort of assumed, in terms of our memory accesses or our fetch stage, we sort of assume they take, this length of time. That may have been optimistic, right? If we're building our memory out of DRAM cells, and our clock cycle is 350 picoseconds, but memory accesses take 200 times this long, right? Then the delays from these stages from fetch and memory access go through the roof, and our performance is just going to tank. So we got to figure out a better way to kind of access this memory than to try to find the best of both worlds. To kind of put this at a human scale, also, right? If imagine that a single clock cycle on the processor is equivalent to 1 second, right? So you can imagine that if you're writing a term paper, then the amount of time it takes to access a D flip-flop is sort of like looking down at your desk at an open book and kind of scanning to find the spot on the page where you are referencing and then using that piece of information. If you are building your memory out of SRAM cells, then, this is equivalent to not being able to have sort of any open books on your desk. Anytime you want to access a piece of information, you have to, take a book out of a stack that's on your desk, find the right spot in that you're referencing in the book, reference it, and then put the book back. You're not allowed to kind of keep anything open. And if it's a DRAM cell you're trying to access, this takes 50 to 200 times as long. That's like not being able to have anything on your desk at all. Anytime you want to reference something, you have to stand up, walk over to your bookshelf, grab a book off of the bookshelf, come back, flip open the book, find the spot where you want to reference, and as soon as you're done with it, close the book up, walk back, put it back on your bookshelf, and then sit back down at your desk. And writing a paper like that would just, it would take forever. If memory accesses are truly random, then at this step, we're kind of hosed. But it turns out that memory accesses are not purely random when a computer program runs. They actually exhibit two types of kind of consistency that we call temporal and spatial locality. And so to extend the idea of the book metaphor, temporal locality says if I'm accessing a piece of information or a piece of my computer memory in one spot, then in a very short amount of time, I'm very likely to need that same piece of information again. Spatial locality says if I'm referencing one piece of information then very likely in the near future, I'll want to reference information that's nearby. And so, this is equivalent, right, to if I found a piece of information in a book, I might need to refer to that same piece of information a couple of times before I'm sort of finished with it. And similarly, if I'm referencing a piece of information in a book, then it's very likely that I'll need information that's nearby on the same page, or if I have related books in a I'll need information that's in a book nearby that will be sort of stored together on the bookshelf. And we can see temporal and spatial locality anytime we sort of run our computer programs. On the left is we can see that in terms of instructions, we definitely have spatial locality, because if I'm accessing this load instruction right here, then I'm definitely going to need the next instruction immediately after that instruction is finished. So pretty much every instruction executes this spatial locality. And even with like loops, right? If I'm branching, I'm typically branching somewhere within a narrow range of where my program is actually executing. Additionally, I've got temporal locality because of this loop, right? If I'm executing this load instruction and it's part of this of a loop, then there's a good chance that I'm going to take this loop and I'm going to execute that same instruction relatively soon. So the instructions in our computer memory exhibit both temporal and spatial locality. Additionally, the data in our memory also exhibits temporal and spatial locality. You can see here, if I'm accessing a data value memory, for instance, I'm loading it into R1, it's very likely that sometime in the near future, I'll want to be storing a value from a register back into that place in memory. So that's definitely temporal locality. If I'm accessing it at one location, then very, very soon, I'm highly likely to want to access that memory location again. Additionally, my data memory also typically exhibits spatial locality. You can see down here at the sort of the bottom of my program, I've got 3 data values that are kind of next to each other. If I'm accessing one, then it's highly likely that nearby in my program, I'm going to want to access the other data values as well. So data also exhibits temporal and spatial locality. And so we can leverage these to build a memory system which somehow is able to be both big and fast. And the way we do that is by using a little of each type of memory. So what we're going to do is instead of building one really big memory out of a very slow thing like a DRAM cell, we'll build the main memory out of that slow one that can be really big and pretend to be our sort of very large memory that our processor uses. And then we'll add these things called caches, level 1 and level 2 caches, which are built out of the faster and larger memory like the D flip-flops or the SRAM cells. So the lower your cache number goes, right? L1 caches are closest to the processor. L2 caches, level 2 caches sit in, closer to main memory. And so these 2 caches, they get progressively smaller as they go. But they also get progressively faster. And so we can exploit our spatial locality by transferring our memory in blocks. So if in the running of a program, I want to access memory location B, we're going to engineer our hierarchy so that not only B, but also the values around B, like A and C, get transferred into my caches. And the chances are high that if I'm accessing B, I'm going to also want to access A and C in the near future. We will also take advantage of our temporal locality by keeping recently used memory in our caches until requirements force us to evict it or to push it back to main memory. And so if I'm accessing memory location B and this whole chunk gets copied into my L2 and then my L1 cache, the chances are I'm going to need B and or A and C in the near future. And what we'll do is we'll leave this data here in the L1 cache on the chance, which is fairly high, that I'm going to access those memory locations kind of multiple times over the course of a very short period of time. And it's only when sort of if I fill up my L1 or L2 cache and I need to make some room for something else, that I'll sort of move stuff out back to main memory. And if I can manage to sort of, shuffle this memory around intelligently, then I can potentially get the benefits of a really large main memory with a really fast cache memory. So you can see down here, kind of when we talk about the memory hierarchy, it's effectively this pyramid here, where I'm building a series of memory systems which get progressively larger and also progressively slower. You can even sort of imagine the registers at the very top of this pyramid, which are, effectively a form of memory. They're the smallest form of memory on the processor, but they're immediately available, right? They are accessible within a single instruction. My caches, L1, L2, L3 caches, form slightly larger and larger pieces of memory that take a little bit longer to access before getting to what's called my main memory. And then underneath that is my persistent storage, my non-volatile storage. So that would be like my SSD or my hard drive, which we won't necessarily talk about. It takes comparatively ages to access that, and it's a very complex process that the computer uses to try to make it seem as though we can access these two pieces of memory very quickly. So what we're going to do over the next couple of lessons is take a look at how exactly do we sort of engineer these caches, what are the processes by which we move stuff to and from the caches to main memory, and what effect that has on performance. The last thing I'll note is that in this class, we're only going to sort of consider what are called inclusive caches, and what that means is that for every piece of data in something like a level 1 cache, there is a copy of that data in both the level 2 and the cache and the main memory. An exclusive cache would be one in which the only copy of memory A, B, and C is in the L1 cache, and that just is a little too complex for us in this class. Okay, so that's all I got. I'll see you all next time.